Hello everyone, today we are presenting issue 16 titled Must We Cut CO2 Emissions to Save Our Environment? This issue connects directly to chapter 9 of our textbook, which focus on businesses and environmental sustainability. The yes position is presented by economist Robert Pollin in his article titled The New Green Economy, while the no position is presented by Alex Newman in his article titled Shackling the Planet to Save It. Over the course of this presentation, we will walk through the issue itself, we will analyze it using the ethical frameworks discussed in class, and then each of us will take a side and debate the issue. Before we get into the debate itself, it helps to see how this issue connects to Chapter 9. The chapter presents three approaches to environmental responsibility in business. The first is the market approach, which says that free markets, consumer demand, and competition can drive the development of cleaner technology. Poland points to renewable energy investment as evidence that this is already happening, and even Newman prefers market solutions over government mandates. The second is the regulatory approach, which treats pollution as a market failure. Businesses are able to shift environmental costs onto society without paying for them, and that is why regulations and emissions targets exist in the first place. Poland supports this regulatory approach, while Newman believes it goes too far. The third is the sustainability approach, also known as the triple bottom line, which says that businesses should weigh people, planet, and profit together rather than focusing on profit alone. Poland's entire argument is really a real-world example of this approach in action. The issue we are examining is whether society must significantly reduce carbon dioxide emissions in order to protect the environment. CO2 is a greenhouse gas that is released mainly by burning fossil fuels, and as it builds up in the atmosphere, it traps heat and drives climate change. The real debate is not actually about whether climate change exists. It is about whether the economic and social costs of major emissions cuts are worth paying. Poland says yes, arguing that reductions are necessary to protect ecosystems, public health, and future generations. Newman says aggressive cuts raise costs and can harm economic growth, jobs, and economic freedom. Both of these positions are what we will unpack for the rest of this presentation. This issue matters because it touches both business and society directly. From a business perspective, nearly every industry is exposed to energy costs. Companies that lean heavily on fossil fuels face growing regulatory pressures, while companies that invest in renewables and efficiencies can gain a real competitive edge. From a societal perspective, climate change is linked to rising temperatures, extreme weather, food and water insecurity, and broader economic disruption. Chapter 9 frames this as a business ethics issue precisely because it forces a balance between profits, social responsibility, and long-term environmental impacts. This issue raises several ethical dilemmas that facts alone cannot resolve. The first dilemma is who is harmed and when. Cutting emissions creates immediate costs for workers and businesses, while failing to cut them risks long-term harm to future generations. The second dilemma involves rights versus sovereignty. Do nations have the right to use their own energy resources as they choose, or does everyone share a right to a stable environment? The third dilemma is fairness across nations. Developing countries contributed the least to historical emissions but may suffer the most, while fossil fuel workers bear real transition costs. The fourth dilemma is responsible leadership. Should business leaders prioritize sustainability even if it raises costs, or should they focus on profit, jobs, and competitiveness? These four tensions are why this issue remains so controversial. We can analyze these dilemmas using the ethical frameworks discussed in class. Utilitarianism asks what creates the greatest good for the greatest number. Poland says that cutting emissions prevents widespread harm, while Newman says that the immediate costs to workers and businesses count just as much. Looking at rights and duties, Poland argues that we have a duty to protect future generations, while Newman argues that the nations have a right to sovereignty over their own energy decisions. Looking at justice and fairness, Poland says wealthy nations should bear more responsibility since poorer nations suffer more, while Newman says mandates are unfair when burdens fall unevenly across countries and industries. Finally, looking at virtue ethics, Poland's version of a responsible leader shows stewardship and concern for the common good, while Newman's version is a leader who is courageous enough to challenge policies they see as harmful or ineffective. These are the same four frameworks, yet they lead to two very different conclusions, which is exactly why reasonable people disagree on this issue. Now I will present the yes position. Robert Poland argues that we must cut CO2 emissions because climate change presents serious environmental risks and because reducing emissions can be accomplished without sacrificing economic growth. His key points are as follows. Climate change poses serious risks that are well documented. Current emission levels are unsustainable. Delaying action only increases future harm and future cost. Importantly, the renewable energy transition that Poland called for back in 2015 is already well underway today, so it's not just a hypothetical idea. Looking through a utilitarian lens, reducing emissions benefits the greatest number of people. Looking through a rights lens, people have a right to a healthy environment. My second argument is that renewable energy disproves the idea that environmental protection and economic growth are incompatible. My assigned additional reading, the International Energy Agency's Renewables 2025 report, projects that global renewable capacity will grow by roughly 4,600 gigawatts between 2025 and 2030, and it finds that renewables are set to surpass coal as the largest source of electricity generation worldwide. Solar makes up the majority of that growth, which supports Poland's claim that clean energy investment creates more jobs than comparable fossil fuel investments. The report also finds that renewable deployment since 2010 has helped countries avoid about $1.3 trillion in additional fossil fuel import costs. So this is not just good for the environment, it also strengthens energy security. Together, Poland's article and the IEA data show that cutting emissions is both practical and beneficial, which is why my answer to today's question is yes, we must cut CO2 emissions to save our environment.
Now I'll be presenting the no position. While climate change presents serious environmental challenges, Alex Newman argues that the solution must balance environmental protection with economic stability and social equity. His concern is not with protecting the environment itself, but with the economic and social consequences of aggressive government mandates aimed at reducing emissions. First, emissions mandates can increase energy prices. Higher electricity, fuel, and transportation costs affect nearly every business and household because energy is a basic input for manufacturing, agricultural, shipping, and daily life, as we're experiencing today. When energy becomes more expensive, those costs are often passed on to consumers. Second, businesses may face increased operating costs and compliance costs. Companies may need to invest in new equipment, modify production processes, or comply with additional regulations. Newman argues that these costs can reduce profitability, limit competitiveness, and slow economic growth. Third, there's a potential for job losses in traditional energy industries. The workers shown here represent one of Newman's primary concerns. As energy policies change, the economic impact is not felt by corporations alone. It's also felt by workers, families, and communities that depend on traditional energy industries for their livelihoods. While new jobs may be created in renewable energy industries, the transition can be difficult for those who rely on existing energy infrastructure. Another important concern involves developing countries. Many developing nations rely on affordable and reliable energy to improve living standards, reduce poverty, and grow their economies. Newman argues that strict emissions requirements may place greater burdens on countries that are still working to achieve economic development. Finally, Newman believes that technology and innovation may offer solutions without extensive government mandates. Advances in energy efficiency, cleaner fuels, carbon capture, and other technologies may reduce emissions while allowing businesses and economies to continue growing. From an ethical egoism perspective, businesses must protect their own interests and remain financially viable in order to survive and continue serving customers and employees. Looking through their shareholder theory, managers have a duty to prioritize shareholder value and avoid policies that unnecessarily increase costs. From a justice and fairness perspective, climate policy should avoid placing disproportionate burdens on workers, low income households, and developing countries that may be least able to absorb these costs. For these reasons, supporters of the no position argue that environmental goals should be pursued carefully and strategically, balancing sustainability with economic growth, energy affordability, and fairness for workers, businesses, and developing nations. My additional reading is called Shackling the Planet to Save It by William Jasper. This article supports the no position by arguing that international climate agreements can impose significant economic costs while also limiting national sovereignty. Jasper suggests that many proposed climate policies require government and businesses to spend large amounts of money to meet emissions targets, which can increase energy prices and place additional burdens on consumers and industries. Another concern raised in the article is the impact on developing nations. Many countries still rely heavily on affordable fossil fuels to support economic growth, reduce poverty, and improve quality of life. Critics argue that strict emissions mandates may slow development by making energy more expensive and less accessible. Jasper also emphasizes the role of technological innovation. Rather than relying primarily on government regulations and international agreements, he argues that advances in energy efficiency, cleaner fuels, carbon capture technologies, and private sector innovation may provide solutions that reduce emissions while allowing economies to continue growing. This perspective aligns most closely with the market approach discussed in Chapter 9, which argues that competition, consumer demand, and innovation can encourage businesses to develop cleaner technologies without extensive government intervention. Supporters of this view believe that markets are often more flexible and efficient than regulations at solving environmental challenges. From an ethical standpoint, this approach also reflects concerns about economic freedom, shareholder value, and the fairness to workers and communities that depend on traditional energy industries. In conclusion, this debate is about much more than climate science. It's about ethics, economics, sustainability, and leadership. Throughout this presentation, we examined two different perspectives on whether society most significantly reduced carbon dioxide emissions to protect the environment. Paulin argues that reducing CO2 emissions through renewable energy investment can protect the environment while supporting economic growth, job creation, and long-term sustainability. His position reflects the sustainability approach discussed in Chapter 9, which encourages businesses to balance people, planet, and profit. Newman argues that mandatory or rapid emissions reductions can impose a significant economic cost, increase energy prices, and threaten national sovereignty. He believes market driven innovation and technological advancement may provide solutions without extensive government mandates. His position aligns more closely with the market approach and emphasizes economic freedom, competitiveness, and affordability. The ethical frameworks discussed in Chapter 9 help explain why reasonable people can reach different conclusions on this issue. Utilitarianism, rights theory, justice and fairness, ethical egoism, and shareholder theory each emphasize different values and responsibilities when evaluating climate policy. Ultimately, Chapter 9 reminds us that businesses must balance profits with responsibility to society and the environment. As future business professionals, decisions involving sustainability, energy, and social responsibility will only become more important throughout our careers. So we will leave you with this question: can businesses balance profitability, sustainability, and social responsibility while also reducing CO2 emissions? Thank you. We're happy to take any questions. Aloha.